Anna and Jake were eager to escape the chaos of city life and booked a weekend in a remote cabin deep in Blackwood Pines, a place famous for its serene beauty and isolation. The cabin, surrounded by towering trees and dense forest, seemed like the perfect retreat. On the first evening, the couple sat by the fireplace, the warmth comforting after their long drive. As night fell, the silence of the woods became unsettling. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees took on an eerie tone, but they shrugged it off as their nerves. Around midnight, Anna woke up to a faint scratching noise coming from outside. She looked out the window, only to see nothing but darkness and trees swaying in the wind. The next day, while exploring the forest, they discovered old, weathered warning signs nailed to trees. The signs spoke of disappearances in the area and warned travelers not to stay after dark. That night, the scratching returned, louder this time. Jake, determined to find the source, grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. But as he shone the light around, something caught his eye. Deep claw marks etched into the side of the cabin, fresh and jagged. They decided to leave at first light, but the night had other plans. As they huddled inside, the scratching grew louder and more desperate, coming from every side of the cabin. The windows rattled, and shadows moved unnaturally in the corners of the room. Just before dawn, they heard it, a low, growling voice whispering their names from the darkness outside. Emily and Tom thought they had found the perfect spot for a romantic weekend, a secluded lake house on the edge of Stillwater Lake. The house was old but charming, with large windows offering breathtaking views of the still water, which reflected the dense woods that lined its shores. They spent the first day swimming and relaxing, enjoying the peacefulness that seemed to envelope the entire area. On the second night, as they sat on the porch watching the moonlight shimmer on the lake, Emily noticed something strange, a figure standing at the water's edge across the lake. It was too far to make out any details, but the figure was motionless, staring in their direction. When she pointed it out to Tom, it was gone. The next evening, as the sun set, they heard faint splashing sounds coming from the lake. Tom looked out to see ripples spreading across the water, but nothing to explain the disturbance. The sound grew louder, and the ripples turned to waves, though the air was perfectly still. Suddenly, an eerie silence fell. Then, they saw it. A pair of glowing eyes just beneath the surface, slowly moving toward the house. In a panic, they retreated inside, locking the doors and windows. The water lapped violently at the shore, as if something was clawing its way out of the lake. That night, they were haunted by the sound of footsteps sloshing through the mud outside, circling the house, accompanied by a deep, inhuman growl. By morning, they discovered wet footprints leading from the lake straight to their door. Desperate to escape, they rushed to leave, only to find their car covered in algae, as if something had crawled out of the water to claim them. Samantha and her friends were thrilled for a weekend away from the city, booking a remote lodge high in the mountains. The lodge, surrounded by thick pine forests and snow-capped peaks, promised peace and adventure. When they arrived, the air was crisp and the view breathtaking, but something about the lodge felt off. The caretaker who greeted them seemed uneasy, warning them not to venture into the forest after dark. The first night passed uneventfully, but the second night brought strange occurrences. The air became unnaturally cold, and they started hearing whispers coming from the woods. That evening, one of their friends, Chris, disappeared after stepping outside for fresh air. Frantically searching, they found no trace of him, except for strange footprints leading into the forest. The footprints were human, but something was off. They seemed to change shape halfway through, turning into something far more sinister, like the tracks of a large animal. As the group became more desperate, they uncovered an old journal in the lodge's attic, belonging to a previous guest. The journal told of an ancient curse tied to the mountain, a legend of creatures that lured people into the woods, never to be seen again. Fear overtook them as they realized they were not alone and that something in the woods was hunting them. Emma and her boyfriend, Ben, planned a romantic weekend getaway at a remote lighthouse located at Ravens Point, a rugged coastal town with a dark history. The lighthouse, perched on a cliff overlooking the stormy sea, had been converted into a cozy bed and breakfast. On the first night, the wind howled outside, but inside, the crackling fire kept them warm. However, as the night wore on, Emma began hearing the sound of a distant foghorn, even though there was no fog. Stranger still, Ben swore he saw a figure standing at the edge of the cliffs, just outside their window, staring at the sea. When they asked the innkeeper about it the next day, he hesitated, saying the figure was likely a ghost of an old lighthouse keeper who had disappeared many years ago after his family drowned in a shipwreck. The next evening, the couple ventured to the old lighthouse itself, which had long been abandoned. As they explored its dark, narrow passages, the air grew cold and the sound of the foghorn intensified. They started hearing footsteps behind them, but when they turned around, there was no one there. Panicked, they rushed back to the bed and breakfast, only to find the figure now standing at the foot of their bed, soaked with seawater and with eyes filled with rage. Jessica and her group of friends decided to go camping for the weekend, settling on a little-known campground deep in the woods, far from civilization. The site had no cell service, but the group welcomed the isolation, excited for a weekend of hiking, campfires, and stories. On the first night, they heard strange, distant screams echoing through the trees, but they dismissed them as animals or the wind. The next morning, while exploring, they stumbled upon a strange, run-down cabin, hidden in the woods, with a symbol carved into the door, a circle with lines through it. They found old camping gear inside, long abandoned, and a journal describing a chilling event that happened years ago. Campers disappearing without a trace, with only that mysterious symbol left behind. As night fell, eerie lights appeared deep within the forest, moving closer to their campsite. The screams from the previous night returned, louder and more desperate. One of the group, Mike, wandered off to investigate, but when he didn't come back, the remaining friends realized they were in grave danger. As they searched for Mike, they found the symbol from the cabin, carved into the trees around their site, glowing faintly. Whatever had taken the previous campers was now after them. It was supposed to be the perfect weekend getaway. A group of 4 friends, Emma, Ben, Rachel, and Tom, rented a boat to explore a small uninhabited island off the coast. The island, though beautiful, had a dark past. According to local legends, the island was once home to an old, secretive community that vanished mysteriously, leaving nothing but the ruins of their village and eerie tales passed down by the locals. As soon as the group arrived, they were struck by the eerie silence that seemed to engulf the island. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of waves and the occasional rustling of trees. Despite the unsettling vibe, the friends set up camp near the ruins of the old village, determined to make the most of their weekend. That night, as they sat around the campfire, Ben began to hear faint whispers coming from the trees. He brushed it off as the wind, but the whispers grew louder and more insistent. The rest of the group started to hear them too. Disjointed voices, too quiet to understand, but impossible to ignore. The whispers continued into the night, growing closer and more distinct. Emma claimed she saw figures moving in the shadows between the trees. The others laughed nervously, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. But deep down, they all felt it. They weren't alone. Things escalated the next day when they stumbled upon a hidden graveyard, the headstones so old that the names were barely readable. One grave, however, caught their attention. It was freshly dug. The dirt was loose and unsettled, as if someone or something had disturbed it recently. By that evening, the whispers were constant. Ben, now visibly shaken, insisted they leave immediately. But as they packed their things, they realized something terrifying. Their boat was gone, its moorings severed. Stranded, with no way off the island, the group huddled together, desperately trying to ignore the ever closer whispers. In the dead of night, Rachel vanished. No one heard a sound. She was simply gone. The whispers, now clear and unmistakable, called out her name from the woods. The remaining friends were trapped in a nightmare, unsure of who or what was coming for them next. The island had claimed another victim, and the whispers promised they wouldn't stop until they had them all.